Dawn crept over Carter
Mr. Carter,
Ranch, draping the
have you
rugged hills
reconsidered
of
my
central
offer?
Texas in mist and honeyed light. The old barn, faded red and weather-beaten,
You're
stood like a
nothing but a
soldier at
stubborn old
attention
fool.
against the breeze. Every board, every rail fence, every hoof print in the dust seemed to hold the story of generations. Most of all, Everett Carter's story. He rose before the sun, as always, his breath steady in the chill. 64 years old, but to the townsfolk, he might as well have been as ancient as the ranch itself.
Boy.
The years had left their marks, wrinkles as deep as the drought cracks in his land, a left leg replaced with steel and plastic from a war half the world away, and eyes sharp as any hawk's over his fields. Everett never complained. He just got up, strapped on his prosthetic, and went to work, cane in hand, shadowed by his grandson, Ryan. Ryan, 17, freckle-faced and gangly, tried to copy his grandfather's silent strength, though sometimes his restless energy betrayed him. He was up with Everett that morning, hauling feed, patching a fence post the coyotes had battered, talking quietly to the animals as he worked. The ranch had always been hard living, harder now, with the summer's dry grip refusing to let go. The creek that watered the cattle was little more than a memory, a few muddy pools winking in the brush. Everett scanned the horizon, pausing as a silhouette flickered at the end of the long drive. A black SUV, tires spitting gravel, windows mirrored dark. Ryan stiffened. "Who's that, Grandpa? Just watch, son." The car rolled to a halt, dust swirling. From the driver's seat stepped a woman in a crisp navy suit, heels clicking, sunglasses hiding her eyes, her hair in a severe ponytail that didn't move an inch in the wind. Blair Whitmore. She looked like she'd come straight from a city boardroom to the edge of the world. Two men and a woman flanked her, legal pads and briefcases at the ready. Blair took in the land with a kind of practiced pity, lips pursed. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice echoing across the dry yard. "You know why I'm here?" "I reckon I do, Blair. Let's not waste time. My firm is prepared to offer you $1.8 million for this place. That's more than fair, given your situation." Everett felt Ryan bristle behind him. He stood a little taller, leaning on his cane. "It's not for sale." Blair's smile tightened. "Mr. Carter, you're an old soldier. You know how battles go. The drought's only getting worse. You can't keep this up forever. Don't let sentiment ruin your future. Think of your grandson." Everett's gaze hardened. "You don't know anything about my family." Blair stepped closer, her voice dropping low. "Sell now, and you walk away with dignity. Hold out, and you'll lose everything: land, cattle, even the roof over your head. The bank won't be patient forever." Everett looked at the earth, the barn, the Mustang paddock beyond the yard. Storm, his coal-black stallion, wild mane tossing, watched from the gate, ears forward, nostrils flaring as if he sensed trouble. Blair gestured for her team to follow as she turned, a note of finality in her voice. "I'll give you until Friday. After that, my offer disappears. Remember, this is business, not personal." Everett stood silent, but his jaw set. Blair's SUV peeled off, leaving a cloud of red dust hanging. Ryan kicked at the dirt. "They can't just take it from us. Not if we stand our ground." The day wore on with chores and worry. By afternoon, word had spread. Carter Ranch was all anyone talked about at the feed store, the diner, even church. Some folks whispered support. Others eyed the payout Blair dangled, calculating how much their own troubles could be eased by her money. That evening, Everett went to town for supplies: flour, salt, a sack of seed, and a bag of horse feed for Storm. The store was crowded, more than usual, everyone pretending to browse but really just waiting for him. Blair was there too. She stood by the counter, conferring with a local banker, her legal team in tow. The room went still as Everett entered, every eye turning. Blair smiled, a cat with cream. Everett moved past, ignoring her, but she called out, "Mr. Carter, have you reconsidered my offer?" He kept his back straight, refusing to answer. Blair's face darkened. She strode over, standing too close. "Are you really going to let stubbornness drive your family into ruin?" The room seemed to shrink. Everett didn't flinch. "I'd rather lose everything with honor than give in to threats." Blair's voice rose, sharp as a slap. "You're nothing but a stubborn old fool." She reached down, in a sudden, cruel gesture, and knocked Everett's cane from his grip. He stumbled, catching himself on a display. Laughter bubbled up from a few onlookers, others gasped. At that instant, a black flash streaked past the store's windows. Storm, untied, had sensed his master's distress. The Mustang reared at the door, his hooves striking the boards, whinnying loud enough to shake the shelves. The crowd scattered, some running, some shouting. Storm burst through, tossing his head, herding Blair and her team back with a fury no human dared challenge. Everett steadied himself, meeting Storm's wild eyes. "Enough, boy." Storm stopped, muscles trembling. Blair, shaken, retreated behind her lawyer, her confidence cracked for the first time. Everett reached for his cane, straightened, and faced the crowd. "Is this what we've come to?" The silence was heavy, thick with judgment and something else. Respect. Blair's smirk had vanished. Outside, Storm pawed the dust, waiting for his master. Everett stepped out into the twilight, the town split in two by the sight of one man and one Mustang refusing to bow. Night fell over Carter Ranch like a thick shroud. The moon rose pale and watchful, throwing long shadows across the thirsty ground. Everett Carter didn't sleep much that night. He sat at the kitchen table with the lamp burning low, a cup of black coffee cooling in his hands. Ryan had gone to bed after midnight, still fuming over Blair's public humiliation of Everett and the chaos Storm had caused at the feed store. But Everett's mind was running miles ahead, the old instincts of a soldier warning him. Trouble wasn't finished with them yet. He was right. Before dawn, Storm began to pace the fence line, his ears flicking back and forth. Everett watched from the porch, cane in hand, as the Mustang sniffed the breeze and let out a deep, restless snort. There was a feeling in the air, electric, uneasy. Ryan came out rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Grandpa, what's Storm so wound up about? Just listen, Ryan." There, off in the dark, a pickup rumbled down the county road, headlights off, creeping slow. Everett narrowed his eyes. He recognized the make, a rented flatbed, not a local's. He told Ryan to grab the old shotgun just in case, but to stay put behind the porch rail. The truck disappeared into the fields. Everett waited, holding his breath. Minutes ticked by. Then came the first sign, a metallic clang from the north fence, then another. Storm reared, whinnying, galloping toward the sound. Everett moved as fast as his leg allowed, Ryan right behind him. They reached the fence line in time to see two shadowy figures ducking through the cut wire, slipping away into the mesquite brush. The ground was torn up where the truck had backed in. Several wooden posts lay hacked apart, wire curled and trampled. Damn, Ryan wanted to chase after the men, but Everett put a hand on his shoulder. "No, son, that's what they want. Let's see the damage first." By sunrise, the full scope of the sabotage was clear. Fences cut in 3 places, cattle missing from the upper pasture, water troughs tainted with something oily and bitter-smelling. One of the old cows stood trembling, foam on her lips. Everett's heart sank. He drove Ryan to the creek to fill buckets, only to find the water blocked by a pile of brush and rocks, dammed up to a trickle. The only fresh water source left was a muddy pool by the west fence. Everett's jaw clenched. "Blair," he muttered. "She's trying to break us, Grandpa." Ryan looked ready to explode, fists clenched. Everett steadied him. "We're not going to play her game. Not with anger, not with guns. You hear me, but we can't just... We fight smart. That's how you survive a war." They spent the morning patching fences, moving the weakest cattle to shade, hauling clean water from town. Storm worked with them, herding the stragglers, nipping at heels, keeping a wary eye on the road. By noon, neighbors started arriving, drawn by the news, some on foot, some in battered pickups. A few brought salt licks or sacks of feed, nodding quiet support. Others only watched, eyes darting between Everett's battered truck and the horizon, maybe wondering if they should take Blair's money instead of risking her wrath. At the feed store, rumors spread like wildfire. Folks argued in whispers. Was Everett right to resist Blair, or just being stubborn? In the diner, Blair's lawyer, a smooth-talking man in a tailored suit, bought coffee for anyone willing to listen. He promised jobs, easy money, new development for the town. Some people nodded along, others glared and kept their distance. Back at the ranch, Storm patrolled the paddock, ears sharp, as Ryan and Everett worked on repairing the damage. Ryan's anger simmered. Every time he hammered a fence post, his frustration bled out. Everett, though tired, moved methodically, showing Ryan how to mend, how to set a wire so it held tight, how to check the water for poison. After supper, as dusk deepened, a battered truck pulled up the drive. Everett tensed, but it was just old Mr. Jenkins, their closest neighbor. "Saw what happened, Everett. Damn shame. I got some spare wire if you need it. Thank you, Charlie." Jenkins lowered his voice. "Folks are scared, Everett. Blair's got deep pockets. But some of us remember what your daddy did for this town." Everett nodded, understanding the hidden message. "You tell the others. We're not backing down." Not now. Jenkins left, leaving a half bag of feed and a quiet sense of hope. As night came again, Ryan finished his chores in silence. Everett sat on the porch, listening to the cicadas, feeling the land's pain as his own. Storm came to stand beside him, head lowered. Everett scratched his ears. "They think we're beat, boy," Storm snorted, pawing the earth. Inside, Ryan finally spoke. "Grandpa, we can't just wait for her to take everything. We gotta fight back." Everett's voice was calm, but steel ran through it. "We fight, but we fight smart. Anger gets you killed. Planning wins wars." "That's what Vietnam taught me." Ryan stared out at the dark. "What if nobody helps us? We help each other. That's how families survive." The next day, the tension in the community reached a fever pitch. Some neighbors quietly delivered supplies or offered help. Others kept their distance, afraid of getting on Blair's bad side. The Carter Ranch stood mostly alone. One battered family, an old soldier, a stubborn boy, and a Mustang nobody could tame. But sometimes, the fight is just beginning. Storm whinnied as dawn broke, his silhouette fierce against the rising sun. Everett watched the horizon, cane in hand, knowing the battle lines had been drawn. And he wasn't backing down. Not for all the money in Texas. Not for anyone. The days after the sabotage crept by in a slow, steady march. The relentless Texas sun baked the ground to cracked clay, and the air buzzed with the promise of more trouble. But even in hardship, life at Carter Ranch pressed forward. The wounds to the land and livestock needed tending, and so did the wounds inside the people trying to hold it all together. Everett Carter was up before dawn, his limp more pronounced from exhaustion, but his eyes clear with resolve. He watched Ryan pour oats for the horses, Storm's coat shimmering in the early light. The old Mustang moved with an energy that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than muscle or bone, a kind of will that Everett respected. Storm was more than just a horse. He was a reminder of everything wild and untamable, a living piece of the land. He'd come to the ranch years ago, a blur of hooves and fury, and no one, not even the seasoned cowboys, could gentle him. Only Everett had managed it, not with brute force, but with patience and respect. That's how Everett ran his ranch, and that's how he planned to fight Blair Whitmore. As the morning wore on, Everett and Ryan walked the fence line, checking the repairs. The cattle had calmed a little, but some still refused to drink from the tainted trough. Everett grimaced, remembering the work that still needed doing, clearing the creek, hauling water, burning away the poisoned grass before the wind could carry it further. It was grueling, dirty work, and Ryan was learning the lesson with every calloused palm and sore muscle. During a break under the only shade tree for a mile, Ryan finally spoke. "Grandpa, how did you do it? Back then, I mean." In the war, Everett took his time answering, sipping from a battered canteen. "You keep your head, no matter what. When things go bad, when you feel like the world's falling apart, you don't freeze and you don't lash out. You hold the line. That's what my captain used to say. Hold the line." Ryan nodded, staring at Storm, who grazed nearby, unbothered by the dust and heat. "Were you ever scared?" "Of course I was. Fear keeps you sharp, but you can't let it rule you. You act, even when you're shaking inside." "That's courage." Ryan was silent for a moment, chewing on Everett's words. Then he asked, "Did you ever want to just give up?" Everett smiled, lines deepening at his eyes. "Every day. But I remembered what I was fighting for. My friends, my home, my family. That's what kept me going, and that's what's going to keep us going now." The afternoon dragged on. Ryan worked alongside Everett, his frustration slowly replaced by determination. They burned the poisoned grass in small, controlled patches, watched by Storm, who seemed to sense when danger was near. The old Mustang would circle the area, nostrils flared, and only relax when Everett gave the all-clear. By sunset, they'd done all they could for the day. As they walked back to the house, Ryan glanced at his grandfather. "Grandpa, you think people will come help us?" "Maybe," Everett said. "But we don't count on it. We count on each other first." Just as they reached the yard, a battered old pickup rattled up the drive, sending a swirl of dust into the fading light. Everett tensed, until he saw the driver, a broad-shouldered man in a faded army jacket and Stetson hat. "Mike Lane," Everett called, a rare warmth in his voice. Mike climbed out, grinning. "You look like hell, old man. You should see the other guy." They shook hands, the grip firm, years of history in a single gesture. "This your grandson?" Ryan nodded, trying to hide his awe. He'd heard stories of Mike Lane, Everett's old army sergeant, a legend in his own right. Mike was the kind of man who could clear a bar with a look and mend a fence with one hand tied behind his back. "Heard you've been having trouble," Mike said, eyes narrowing as he scanned the ranch. "Figured I'd come see for myself." Everett filled him in as they sat on the porch, Storm resting his head near Ryan's knee. Mike listened without interrupting, then spat into the dust. Blair Whitmore's picked the wrong fight. Mike reached into the cab of his truck and pulled out a battered radio. Got a few old buddies who owe me a favor or two. Thought they might want to help keep watch, seeing as how you're under siege and all. Everett shook his head, a mixture of pride and relief. Always 2 steps ahead, aren't you? That's my job. By the next morning, a quiet procession of old pickups and motorcycles made their way down the county road. Men and women in battered jeans and army jackets climbed out, some missing limbs, some sporting faded tattoos. Veterans, Everett's kind of people. They didn't make a fuss, didn't ask for thanks. They just set up camp by the barn, posted lookouts along the fence line, and kept the coffee hot and the conversation low. Ryan watched them in awe, seeing in these strangers the same steel he saw in his grandfather. It made him feel safer, but also more responsible. The fight wasn't just for their family anymore. It was for all of them. That night, Storm grazed quietly under the stars as Everett, Ryan, and Mike sat around the fire, swapping stories and plans. Everett leaned in, voice low. "You remember what we fought for, Mike? Freedom, home, the right to stand your ground." Everett nodded, his hand resting on Storm's mane. "That's all we're doing here. Just holding the line one more time." Ryan listened, his heart steadying with every word. In the shadows, Storm lifted his head and snorted softly, as if to say, "I'm with you, come what may." The following week brought a fragile sense of hope to Carter Ranch, though it clung to the land like dew that refused to dry under the Texas sun. The arrival of Mike Lane and his small army of veterans didn't go unnoticed in the town. Word traveled fast, quicker than cattle in a stampede, that Everett Carter wasn't fighting alone anymore. Every day, new faces showed up at the gate. Some were just there to drop off supplies: hay, salt licks, spare parts, canned beans. Others stayed, rolling up their sleeves and taking quiet posts at the fence line. In a community where most folks kept their heads down and minds on their own troubles, this gathering of support felt like a rebellion. For Ryan, it was life-changing. He watched these weathered men and women work, some limping, some scarred, all moving with the silent discipline of people who knew hardship. They didn't talk about what brought them together. They just got to work. One morning, after the chores, Mike gathered a few of the veterans and began fortifying the old barn. They reinforced doors, rewired the generator, and checked every inch for weak spots. Everett joined them, his eyes full of gratitude he never spoke out loud. Meanwhile, Ryan found himself spending more and more time with Storm. The Mustang had become his anchor in the whirlwind. The two would ride out along the property at dawn, Ryan learning how to read every flick of Storm's ear, every pause and snort. There was an almost telepathic bond forming. When Storm tensed, Ryan learned to trust it. One afternoon, as a thunderhead rolled over the hills, Storm suddenly stopped at a patch of thistle, his ears flat. Ryan slid from the saddle and found a length of barbed wire, coiled and hidden, that could have crippled any cow that wandered through. He shuddered at the sabotage but thanked Storm with a gentle rub on the nose. Training sessions became daily rituals. Under Mike's watchful eye, Ryan taught Storm new signals and trail work: how to respond to a whistle, how to circle back at a snap of the fingers, how to stand stock still when danger was near. Storm seemed to thrive on the challenge. Even the veterans, usually reserved, gathered to watch, some shaking their heads in disbelief. "That horse is a damn mind reader," one said. "Or maybe he just trusts his people," another replied, Blair Whitmore, sensing her pressure campaign stalling, didn't stop her efforts. Her men still prowled the county roads, and she sent new letters, thick with legal threats and dire warnings, hoping to break Everett's resolve. But every morning, the stack of unopened envelopes grew on Everett's kitchen table. He'd stopped reading them altogether. One evening, after supper, a knock came at the door. Everett opened it to find Linda Mendoza, the town's school principal, holding a box of fresh vegetables from her garden. "My husband says you could use some squash and tomatoes." Everett nodded, inviting her in. She glanced at the crowded living room. Veterans playing cards, Ryan studying maps, Storm's head poking through the open window as if eavesdropping. "It's good," she said quietly, "seeing folks come together like this. Not everyone agrees, but more people support you than you know." Everett smiled. A rare sight. "Appreciate it, Linda." That night, after everyone turned in, Ryan couldn't sleep. He wandered out to the paddock, where Storm grazed in the moonlight, the sky humming with cicadas and distant thunder. Ryan sat on the fence, knees pulled to his chest, and stared at the horizon. Storm ambled over, bumping Ryan's shoulder with his nose. Ryan laughed quietly. "You ever get scared, Storm?" The Mustang nickered, chewing thoughtfully as if to say, "Maybe, but I don't let it stop me." Ryan closed his eyes, letting the peace settle over him. For the first time in weeks, he felt hope flicker, faint but real. The next morning brought a different kind of energy, an undercurrent of calm before the storm. Mike gathered Everett and the others by the barn, reviewing what supplies they had and what they'd still need if things got worse. Neighbors who'd once kept their distance now came by with quiet nods and quick smiles. Some left donations, others simply offered a word of encouragement. One of the veterans, a wiry woman named Darlene, taught Ryan how to fix a stubborn generator. Another, Big Joe, showed him how to patch a saddle and sharpen a fence tool until it gleamed. "This is how we win," Joe said. "Not just with muscle, but with brains and heart." By now, the news of Carter Ranch's struggle had spread beyond the town. Local radio stations picked up the story. A few old-timers reminisced on air about Everett's days in Vietnam and how his father had once saved half the county from a wildfire. Listeners called in, some offering prayers, others asking how they could help. Blair, meanwhile, grew restless. Her intimidation tactics weren't working. She watched as the community began to rally, her frustration mounting. Her lawyers pushed her to escalate, but Blair was wary. Each failed ploy, each rumor of support for the Carters, chipped away at her confidence. Back at the ranch, there was no illusion that the worst was over. Everett, Mike, and the others kept vigil, patrolling the land in shifts. At night, the veterans gathered around the fire, swapping stories, some funny, some tragic, each one weaving the group closer together. Ryan sat among them, sometimes quiet, sometimes asking questions about war and peace, about what it meant to stand up for something bigger than yourself. The lessons seeped in, wordless and powerful. Storm would lie nearby, head resting on his forelegs, ears flicking as the voices drifted into the night. He was more than a mascot. He was a sentinel, a symbol of what could not be broken. As the moon set and another Texas night deepened, Everett stood at the edge of his porch, looking out over his battered but unbowed land. For the first time since Blair Whitmore arrived, he let himself believe they might actually have a chance. The ranch, the family, the fight, maybe they'd survive this storm after all. Night settled over Carter Ranch, heavy and restless. the air thick with the scent of dry grass and distant smoke from someone's fire. After a long day of repairing fences and tending to the recovering cattle, Everett, Ryan, Mike, and the gathered veterans finally allowed themselves a rare moment of peace. They ate dinner together in the big kitchen, laughing softly at old war stories, planning the next day's chores, pretending, just for a while, that things might be getting back to normal. But Storm, the black Mustang, seemed more agitated than ever that night. He paced the edge of the corral, nostrils wide, muscles tensed, his gaze fixed on the shadowed line of the far pasture. Ryan noticed and mentioned it to Everett as they cleared the table. "Storm's acting strange tonight. He knows something's up," Everett replied quietly. "Always trust the animals?" By 11, most of the ranch was asleep. Only the faint glow from the kitchen window and the muted murmurs of the veterans standing watch broke the stillness. Ryan lay in bed, trying to let his mind rest, but the memory of the recent sabotage and Blair's growing desperation kept him awake. Just past midnight, a shrill, panicked cry shattered the silence. Storm's voice, wild and urgent. Everett was on his feet before he realized it, his hand already reaching for his cane. Ryan stumbled into the hallway, colliding with Mike. The three of them bolted outside, boots crunching over dry dirt. The barn glowed an unnatural orange in the darkness, smoke billowing from the eaves, hungry flames licking the old wood. Storm galloped frantically along the paddock, whinnying, trying to bite at the ropes that held the barn doors closed. Inside, the terrified cries of the horses and cows rose above the roar. Ryan's heart hammered in his chest. "The fire's everywhere, Grandpa." Everett didn't hesitate. He shoved his cane at Mike and limped at a dead run toward the inferno. Mike and Ryan tore off after him. The heat was suffocating, smoke stinging their eyes. Everett grabbed a water hose and aimed it at the door hinges, soaking them down as Ryan fumbled with the knots. Mike kicked at the barn door with his heavy boots until it splintered. The door finally gave way. Storm surged forward, rearing and shrieking, herding the smaller animals out first. Ryan dashed inside, coughing and gasping, grabbing the last trembling calf by the halter and hauling it toward the open air. Mike grabbed a shovel and knocked away burning timbers from blocking the path. One by one, the animals spilled into the yard, some singed, all wide-eyed and wild with terror. The fire's heat pressed close, eating through the roof. Everett's left arm burned from a stray ember. Storm circled the barn, guiding the panicked herd away from the worst of the smoke. "Get back, Ryan," Mike yelled. Ryan staggered from the smoke, his face streaked with soot. The barn roof groaned, then collapsed in a shower of sparks. A cheer rose from the ranch house. More neighbors and veterans ran up with buckets, hoses, and wet blankets, beating back stray embers, forming a line to stop the fire from spreading to the hayshed. A few men tackled the burning fence, stamping out the flames with boots and jackets. After what felt like hours, the worst of the blaze died away. The barn was a charred skeleton, smoke trailing to the stars. The yard was filled with panting, coughing people and frightened livestock. Ryan collapsed to his knees, coughing, tears streaking down his cheeks. Everett knelt beside him, his hand trembling as he checked Ryan's arms for burns. "You're all right, son. We almost lost everything." "Not tonight." A sheriff's car screeched down the lane, siren cutting the darkness. Behind it, two battered pickup trucks, neighbors who'd seen the flames and come running. Sergeant Mike, hair singed and eyes blazing, flagged the sheriff down. "We caught one of the bastards," he growled, holding up a cell phone. Video footage. One of the veterans had filmed the arsonists dousing the barn with gas. Another neighbor, Big Joe, had tackled one of the fleeing men and sat on him until the deputies arrived. The sheriff eyed the evidence, jaw tight. "We'll take it from here." "But you know how slippery Blair's people are." Everett grunted. "That's why we filmed everything." Still, Blair's lawyers arrived before dawn, slick and smug, arguing the evidence was circumstantial. The man caught at the scene clammed up, refusing to name his employer. The sheriff shook his head in frustration. He'd seen this game before. As the adrenaline faded, anger took its place in Ryan's heart. He slammed his fist against the smoking barn wall, tears of fury and grief burning his eyes. They can't keep getting away with this. It's not fair. Everett took Ryan's shoulders, steady and gentle. This is what they want. To make us mad, make us reckless. We hold our ground the right way. We win by being better than them. Mike stepped up, his voice a growl. Law'll catch up with them in the end. But for now, we stand watch. That morning, battered but not broken, the Carter Ranch family and their friends built a makeshift shelter for the animals, patched wounds, and counted losses. The sky was heavy with smoke and tension, but Everett's voice rang out, rallying everyone. We're not beaten, not by a long shot. We rebuild, we protect our own, and we do it together, Storm. Coat singed and hooves blackened, stood in the center of it all, head high, eyes fierce, a living banner that the fight was far from over. The days after the fire bled together in a haze of ash, sweat, and determination. No one at Carter Ranch slept more than a few hours at a time. Every crack of a twig or distant engine sent hearts racing. The barn was gone, but the animals had survived. Some limping, some with burns, but all alive, thanks to the courage and teamwork that bound the Carter family and their friends together. They built a rough shelter with whatever they could find: old tin, warped boards, canvas tarps. Neighbors brought nails, lumber, even a spare generator. By day, the ranchers worked side by side in the rising heat, patching wounds, salvaging tools, checking the creek for signs of new poison. By night, the veterans took turns on watch, rifles propped by the porch, radios crackling with code words and jokes that only old soldiers understood. But in the back of everyone's mind, the same question haunted them. What would Blair Whitmore do next? The answer came in the form of a gathering storm. Early one morning, Ryan saddled Storm for a ride along the property line. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of ozone and distant rain, a rare thing in the drought-plagued hills. The clouds built on the horizon, dark and swirling, promising the kind of Texas storm that could turn the land to mud in minutes. Everett watched the sky with a worried squint. He'd lived through enough of these to know the difference between a blessing and a threat. "Ride careful, son," Ryan nodded, squeezing Storm's sides gently. The Mustang took off at a steady trot, ears twitching, every muscle alert. Ryan had learned to trust Storm's instincts. They'd kept him safe more than once. He followed the creek, expecting little more than a few fallen branches or maybe a lost cow. Instead, as he rounded a bend near the north end of the property, Storm stopped dead, hooves digging into the soft earth. Ryan peered through the trees and felt his stomach drop. The creek was dammed. A thick wall of logs, rocks, and heavy plastic blocked the flow. On the far side, the water pooled, rising steadily, threatening to flood the upper pastures if the dam broke, or leave the ranch with nothing if it held. Ryan jumped down, heart pounding. Who the hell would... He spotted boot prints in the mud, Fresh, deep, not their own. Plastic ties, heavy equipment tracks, and the faint reek of engine oil made the answer clear. Blair had paid someone, maybe the same men who'd torched the barn, to sabotage the water. It was a double-edged threat. Starve the ranch or drown it. Storm snorted, stamping a hoof, as if urging Ryan to move. "We gotta tell Grandpa." Ryan swung back into the saddle and galloped for home, barely slowing for gates and gullies. When he burst into the yard, Everett, Mike, and the veterans came running. "What is it, Ryan? The creek, it's dammed! If the storm hits, it'll flood the whole ranch. If it doesn't, we'll run dry." Everett's face tightened, anger mixing with something colder, determination. "Blair." Mike was already grabbing his boots and a radio. "We need eyes on that dam. If it blows in the storm, we're finished." The group split into teams. Mike and two veterans loaded up with crowbars, saws, and shovels, ready to dismantle whatever they found. Everett stayed behind to organize sandbags and start moving livestock to higher ground. Ryan, pale but steady, insisted on riding with Mike. "I know the trail. And Storm can get us there faster than any truck." Mike looked at Everett, who nodded once. "Go, but be careful." They rode hard. Storm's hooves slicing through the underbrush, the sky growing darker by the minute. At the dam, Mike and the others sized up the sabotage. "This was done by pros," he muttered, yanking at the plastic and wire. "We'll need more than muscle to break this before the rain hits." Ryan snapped pictures with his phone. Proof for the sheriff, the bank, anyone who might listen. But there was no time to wait for the law. The men worked in silence, sweat pouring, hands blistering as they pried loose rocks and snapped plastic ties. Storm paced nearby, eyes fixed on the tree line. Ryan glanced up as thunder rolled overhead. "It's getting worse, Mike. We gotta hurry, back at the ranch." Everett kept his radio close, barking orders as the wind picked up. The neighbors arrived, dropping sandbags and extra feed. Even folks who had kept their distance before now showed up. Blair's latest attack had pushed the community past its tipping point. "We're with you, Everett," one man said, tipping his hat. "No one runs us off our land." The tension was everywhere. People choosing sides, the sky threatening disaster, the creek dammed like a ticking bomb. The whole county seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see which would break first. The storm, the dam, or the Carter family's resolve? At the dam, a final blow from Mike's crowbar split the plastic liner. Water rushed through, churning mud and debris. Storm whinnied, rearing as if to celebrate. Ryan grinned despite himself, soaked to the skin. "We did it. Now let's get home before this storm finishes what Blair started." They raced the rain back to the ranch, the sky now black and boiling. Everett met them at the gate, relief and pride mingling on his face. "You boys did good," but as the first fat drops began to fall, they all knew the fight wasn't over. The night ahead would test everything they had left. Their strength, their unity, and their belief that standing together could still make a difference. And in the barn, Storm stamped and snorted, ready for whatever would come next. The first rumble of thunder shook the windows as dusk settled over Carter Ranch. Dark clouds had rolled in thick and furious, their bellies split with streaks of lightning that cast the land in flickering blue and white. Everett Carter stood on his porch, hand wrapped tight around his cane, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of trouble. He'd seen many storms in his life, both in war and on the ranch, but something about tonight felt different. Maybe it was the dam, or maybe it was the sense that everything, his land, his family, his legacy, was on the line. Inside, Ryan rushed from window to window, gathering up lanterns and extra blankets, his heart pounding as rain pelted the roof. The veterans checked their radios, their voices clipped and urgent. Mike Lane double-checked the generator and barked out assignments, moving with the calm efficiency of a man who'd survived firefights and hurricanes alike. Then, the call came through the radio. A neighbor at the north edge of the property had seen lights by the dam. Not the flicker of lightning, but the steady glow of headlights and flashlights. Blair's men. Everett's jaw tightened. He knew what this meant. Blair wasn't backing down. She was going to force their hand tonight, storm or not. Mike's voice was sharp. "We move now. Everyone who can ride, saddle up. The rest, keep the ranch safe." Everett looked at Ryan. "I need you with me, son." "Storm too," Ryan nodded, grabbing his rein slicker and Storm's bridle. The Mustang was already at the gate, dancing in place as if he knew the fight wasn't finished. They rode out, a small force in the dark. Everett, Ryan, Mike, 3 veterans, and 2 neighbors, all bundled in rain gear, flashlights strapped to their arms, boots already caked in mud. Storm led the way, his head high, ears pricked to every sound. The rain came down in sheets, blurring the world to shadows and streaks of silver. The creek was already rising, its banks swollen and frothing. When they reached the dam site, they saw the headlights first, then the figures. Blair Whitmore herself, flanked by 4 men in heavy coats and muddy boots. 2 of them carried rifles slung low, their faces set with the hard look of men who did what they were paid to do. Everett swung down from his saddle, cane planted deep in the mud. Blair's voice carried over the storm. "I told you, Everett. You should have taken the deal. This land's going to be underwater by morning. One way or another," Everett squared his shoulders. "You'd flood the whole county to get what you want, just your little piece," she sneered. "But if others get hurt, well, that's not my concern." Mike stepped forward, his own rifle slung over his shoulder. The veterans fanned out, weapons ready but not aimed. The tension was thick, the air humming with the promise of violence. Ryan felt his own anger rising, but Everett's voice cut through the chaos. "You want a war, Blair? You got it. But you won't win." The water was already pouring over the dam, the logs and rocks straining under the weight. Blair motioned to her men. "Do it!" Her men stepped forward, one carrying a crowbar, another with a length of chain. They started to reinforce the dam, shoving more debris into the breach, blocking the water as the rain intensified. "We can't let them hold," Mike hissed. "If that dam bursts, half the herd will drown, and the house won't be far behind." Suddenly, Storm broke free from Ryan's grip, rearing up and kicking the mud. He charged down the embankment, hooves flying, eyes wild with purpose. Before anyone could react, he barreled straight into the dam, teeth bared, hooves striking at the weakest points. Blair's men tried to grab him. One lunged, only to be knocked flat as Storm spun and kicked. The Mustang's raw power sent rocks tumbling and logs rolling into the flood. Water gushed through the growing gap. "Get him away from there!" Blair shrieked, but it was too late. With one final leap, Storm landed square on the center of the dam and drove his hooves down, splitting the plastic liner and letting the pent-up water roar free. The creek burst back to life, sweeping away debris and knocking Blair's men off their feet. One managed to scramble out, cursing, while the others flailed in the torrent. The veterans rushed forward, hauling them out of the current, shouting for them to drop their weapons. A teen from the town, there with his phone, live streaming the whole standoff for the world to see, caught every second, The shouting, the struggle, the Mustang's charge, the water's wild escape. The town, and soon the whole county, watched it all unfold in real time. Blair, soaking wet and sputtering, stared in disbelief as her men surrendered one by one, surrounded by ranchers and veterans. The evidence was undeniable. The sabotage, the threats, the armed stand. Caught on camera, broadcast to every phone in town. Everett helped Ryan up, both of them soaked to the skin, both shaking with adrenaline and relief. "You did it, Storm," Ryan whispered, hugging the horse's neck as Storm shivered but stood tall, his coat gleaming in the storm's pale light. Mike grinned through the rain. "Whole town's going to see what really happened here tonight." Blair turned, her mask of arrogance slipping for the first time, her empire crumbling with every new viewer on the livestream. Everett faced her, voice steady over the roar of the creek. "You come for my land again. You better bring more than money and men. You'll never own what you don't respect." Blair had no answer. She slumped away, defeated, as the ranchers, neighbors, and veterans closed ranks around Everett, Ryan, and Storm. The storm rolled on, but the dam was broken. The ranch safe for now, and the Carter family had won the night. Not just with grit, but with the courage of a Mustang and the unity of a community that had finally found its voice. The storm finally spent itself by morning, leaving Carter Ranch draped in a hush broken only by the sound of running water, free at last in the creek. Sunlight slanted through the battered oaks, glinting off puddles and the mud-caked boots of the exhausted, triumphant crowd still gathered at the dam site. The night's drama was already legend. Videos from the teens' live stream had gone viral across town, then county, then as far as regional news, and by breakfast, the world seemed to know the truth. Blair Whitmore had tried to destroy Carter Ranch, and the people, led by a black Mustang, had stopped her cold. The authorities didn't take long to arrive. Sheriff Torres pulled up in a convoy of patrol cars, deputies piling out with cameras, notebooks, and a renewed sense of purpose. Blair, still soaked and shivering, tried to gather her composure as the lawmen approached, but the evidence was undeniable. Footage from half a dozen phones captured everything. The threats, the arsonist's confession, the armed standoff, Storm's fearless charge, and Blair barking orders at her henchmen. Sheriff Torres watched the videos with a face carved from stone. He turned to Blair, voice even and public. "Ms. Whitmore, you're under arrest for conspiracy, destruction of property, and endangering public safety. You have the right to remain silent." For the first time, Blair didn't protest. Her power had evaporated overnight, drowned by the flood she'd tried to unleash. As her men were cuffed and loaded into squad cars, a crowd formed. Neighbors, townsfolk, even people who'd once sided with Blair now turned against her. Their faces were a mix of relief, anger, and vindication. Everett stood near the broken dam, cane planted in the mud, watching Blair's downfall not with triumph, but a tired dignity. He tipped his hat as she was driven away, then turned to his family and friends. "It's over now," he said quietly. "At least this part." Mike clapped him on the back, grinning through a split lip and a bruise forming under one eye. "You stood your ground, old man. Town won't forget that." Back at the ranch, the celebration began almost before the mud had dried. Sergeant Mike and the veterans led the way, hanging a giant American flag from the rebuilt barn frame, stringing up lanterns and hauling out every spare chair and table they could find. Neighbors brought food, casseroles, pies, smoked brisket, and beans, enough to feed an army. Children darted between grown-ups, sneaking bits of pie and trailing behind Storm, who strutted proudly, his coat shining, his legend already growing. Ryan walked the paddock with Storm, accepting hugs and handshakes from people he barely knew, some with tears in their eyes, others with voices hoarse from cheering. Big Joe, battered but grinning, slapped Ryan on the shoulder. "Your horse is something else, kid." "He saved us all," Ryan replied, scratching Storm's nose as the Mustang nuzzled his pocket for treats. Linda Mendoza, the school principal, raised a toast as dusk settled. "To the Carter family, for reminding us what matters, standing up for each other, for justice, and for this land." Glasses clinked. Everett found himself surrounded, not by hired help or hired guns, but by friends. He looked out at the crowd, faces old and young, black and white, ranchers and townfolk, veterans and kids. The line that once divided Carter Ranch from the rest of the world had vanished. Sheriff Torres, still in uniform but now relaxed, offered his own words. "We've seen what happens when good people stay silent. Tonight you all proved that standing together is how we win. Carter Ranch is part of this town's soul, and so are each of you." Mike and the veterans started up a country song around the fire, and soon everyone joined in, laughing, dancing, the dark memory of fear replaced by joy. The kids begged for stories about Storm, who, unfazed by all the attention, let them braid his mane and feed him apples. As the night deepened, Everett sat on the porch beside Ryan, watching the lanterns flicker across the yard. He laid a hand on Ryan's shoulder. "I know it got rough, son. I'm proud of you, of everyone. Sometimes you think you're alone. Then people surprise you." Ryan nodded, voice thick. "I think Storm knew all along. He wouldn't let us give up. No, he wouldn't." Mike plopped down beside them, balancing a cup of strong coffee on his knee. "Town's already talking about turning the old schoolhouse into a community center. People want to keep working together. Maybe set up something for the kids or the veterans. You started something here, Everett." Wasn't just me. Storm, hearing his name, sauntered over and leaned his heavy head against Everett's chest. Everett scratched the horse's ear, feeling the gratitude and the quiet strength. Blair was gone. Her reputation shattered. Her empire already dissolving as lawsuits piled up and the truth came to light. She'd underestimated the land and the people who called it home. The next day, the whole town pitched in to clean up. Fences were mended, fields replanted, the barn rebuilt better than before. The creek flowed free and clear, cattle grazed in peace, and laughter drifted across the fields like music. The veterans lingered, swapping stories and helping with repairs. Some stayed on, finding in the ranch a new sense of purpose. Mike, watching Ryan work Storm through a new drill, shook his head with admiration. "He's got a gift, Everett. So does Storm. He saved this ranch." Everett looked out at his land, battered but unbowed, and knew that what they'd built here, a community, a family, a legend, would outlast any storm. As the sun set, a last cheer rose from the crowd, echoing through the hills. Carter Ranch was safe. Justice had been served, and the future was wide open. With Blair Whitmore gone and the worst behind them, Carter Ranch slowly came back to life. The scars of battle were everywhere. Scorched earth where the barn once stood, singed fence posts, and patches of grass struggling to grow back. But the land, like its people, had always known how to heal. Each morning, Everett Carter rose with the sun, pain lingering in his old wounds, but a steady purpose in his stride. The first order of business was always the cattle, checking every animal for signs of lingering injury or illness. He and Ryan, together with the veterans and neighbors who had become like family, repaired what had been broken. Fences were straightened, gates hung anew, and a fresh coat of paint turned the rebuilt barn a proud, shining red. There was a new energy at the ranch. Folks from town kept showing up to help, sometimes with tools, sometimes with baked goods, sometimes just with a strong back and a kind word. The events of the past weeks had changed them all. Where once neighbors might have glanced away, now they stopped to chat, to lend a hand, to ask after Everett's health or Ryan's progress with Storm. Everett made it a point to thank each person. He'd never been a man for speeches, but as he watched people working together, he realized that the true harvest wasn't just in cattle or hay. It was in the bonds rebuilt after being tested by fire. Ryan changed too. He carried himself taller now, his handshake firmer, his gaze clear. He had learned lessons no school could teach, about courage, endurance, and the quiet pride of standing up for what mattered, even when you felt alone. Storm, the black Mustang, was transformed as well. No longer just a wild legend, he became a symbol of resilience for the whole community. People came from neighboring counties to see the horse that had broken a dam and turned the tide against a powerful enemy. Veterans from near and far visited, drawn by the story and by Everett's quiet invitation to stay a while. One morning, as Everett and Ryan led a group of kids around the paddock, one little boy hesitated at the fence, fear in his eyes. He'd lost his father to war and hadn't spoken much since. Everett knelt beside him, gesturing to Storm. "You know, son, Storm wasn't always so brave. Took him a while to trust people, to learn he was safe." The boy listened, eyes fixed on the big Mustang as Ryan fed him an apple. Storm lowered his head, letting the boy stroke his mane. "He likes you," Ryan said with a gentle smile. "Everybody's afraid sometimes, but you don't have to be strong alone." In that moment, something shifted for the boy, and for Everett, who saw the power of kindness ripple outward, touching lives in ways he hadn't imagined. With the barn rebuilt, Everett invited the local teens and the veterans still staying at the ranch for a day of work and stories. They planted trees where the old ones had burned, painted murals on the barn walls, and shared barbecue under the shade of new saplings. Everett took the opportunity to talk about what he'd learned, not in a lecturing way, but in the quiet voice of a man who'd lived through storms, both real and human. "You fight for your land, sure, but you fight for your neighbors too, for the people who stand with you when it matters. The real victories aren't in winning a battle, but in building something nobody can tear down. Not fire, not greed, not fear." He looked at Ryan, then at the circle of faces around him. Young, old, bruised, but not broken. If you ever wonder what makes a family or a town or a country strong, it's this: sticking together when it would be easier to give up, treating people right, and never letting anyone tell you what you're worth. Sergeant Mike, who had stayed on at the ranch to help with the repairs, nodded along. "Integrity," he said. "That's what matters. A lot of folks out there forget that when money's on the table." But you all remembered, the local newspaper ran a story on Carter Ranch, calling Storm a hero horse, and Everett and Ryan the heart of Hill County. Kids who'd once dreamed of city lights now talked about working with horses, about protecting land and water, about what it meant to truly belong. Veterans who had struggled to find their place outside the service discovered new purpose in the daily rhythm of ranch life. Some taught the teens how to mend tack or train a skittish horse. Others found comfort in Storm's gentle presence, talking quietly to him as they groomed his shining coat. Everett established a small equine therapy program, first for the veterans, then for kids who'd lost parents, then for anyone who needed a place to heal. Storm was at the center of it all, his legend growing with each life he touched. One evening, after a long day's work, Everett and Ryan sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the hills gold. The ranch was quiet but full, of laughter, of music, of hope. "We almost lost it all, Grandpa, but we didn't, son. You know why?" Ryan nodded. "Because we didn't give up, and because we weren't alone." Everett smiled, his heart full. "That's right. No matter what comes next, that's what I want you to remember. Land can be rebuilt, fences can be mended, but the lessons, the bonds, they last a lifetime." The stars came out, one by one, over Carter Ranch. The fight was behind them, but the meaning of what they'd done was only just beginning to bloom. The ranch had survived. So had the people. And the legend of Storm was only getting started. Months passed, and Carter Ranch, once battered by drought and nearly lost to greed and violence, transformed into something more vibrant than Everett Carter could have ever imagined. The scars left by Blair Whitmore's war slowly faded, replaced by new growth. Young oaks, green pastures, rebuilt fences, and laughter drifting on the wind. Storm, the black Mustang, was now more than a legend. He was the soul of the land, a living symbol of courage and second chances. In early autumn, as the heat eased and the hills blushed gold, Carter Ranch became the heart of the county's busiest season. Word had spread far beyond hill country about the place where a family, a community, and a horse had stood against injustice and won. People came from miles away, not just to see Storm, but to experience what Everett and Ryan had built. The ranch had become a hub for youth programs, veteran gatherings, and equine therapy. Everett, at first reluctant to turn private pain into public purpose, found himself moved by the steady stream of visitors, kids struggling with loss, veterans haunted by memories, families seeking a sense of belonging. Storm welcomed them all, patient and gentle, allowing nervous hands to brush his coat and feed him apples from trembling palms. On weekends, Ryan led groups of children through the paddocks, teaching them to care for horses, to mend fences, and to respect the land. Under Mike's guidance, the veterans ran riding clinics and survival workshops. What began as small circles around the fire grew into a steady pulse of activity, each person bringing their own story, their own scars, and finding healing in the rhythm of ranch life. The barn, rebuilt with everyone's help, hosted community dinners every Friday night. Long tables groaned under the weight of home-cooked meals, laughter bouncing off the rafters. People who'd once been strangers, some divided by old feuds, others by fear, sat side by side, passing plates, sharing memories, and making new plans for the future. On the last Saturday of October, the ranch hosted its first community festival, a celebration of survival, of unity, and of hope. Kids decorated pumpkins, painted horseshoes, and listened wide-eyed as old-timers retold the tale of the Storm and the Mustang who'd broken the dam. Storm was the guest of honor, garlanded with ribbons and led through the crowd like royalty. As dusk approached, the crowd gathered near the barn, lanterns glowing in the deepening blue. Linda Mendoza, the school principal, took the makeshift stage first, thanking Everett, Ryan, and the veterans for showing the town what it meant to come together. Sheriff Torres followed, commending the courage shown by ordinary people when tested by extraordinary times. Then, to a chorus of cheers, Everett made his way to the front, leaning on his cane, Ryan and Storm at his side. He paused, looking out over the crowd, his heart full. I never thought I'd see this place come back. Not after all we lost. But I learned something, standing with all of you. Real strength isn't about muscle or money. It's about refusing to let fear or greed divide us. He rested a hand on Storm's neck. This horse, he reminded me every day that you fight for what matters, not just with fists, but with grit, honesty, and hope. We stood our ground, not because we wanted a fight, but because we couldn't walk away from what's right. And when we stood together, nothing could stop us. The crowd stood silent, moved by the simple truth of his words. Everett searched their faces, finding old friends and new children and elders, people who'd once doubted now standing shoulder to shoulder. Ryan stepped forward, voice steady. We owe a lot to Storm, but we owe even more to each other. When things looked darkest, we found light in our neighbors, in our friends. This ranch will always be open to anyone who needs a second chance. The festival became a celebration of resilience. Veterans shared their stories around the fire, children ran with horses across the fields, and for the first time in a long while, hope felt stronger than fear. People from neighboring towns stopped by, asking Everett how they might start their own programs, how they could bring people together the way Carter Ranch had. That night, under a sky thick with stars, Everett sat on the porch with Ryan and Mike, Storm grazing nearby. The sounds of music and laughter drifting on the breeze. He felt the weight of the past lift from his shoulders, replaced by something new, a sense of purpose that would outlast any storm. You think we really made a difference, Grandpa? Everett nodded, his eyes reflecting the firelight. More than you'll ever know, son. Real legacy isn't just land or money. It's the lives we touch, the hope we give, the stories we leave behind. Storm approached, lowering his head so Everett could scratch his favorite spot behind the ear. You did good, boy. The porch filled with more voices as neighbors joined them, eager to talk about the future. Plans for expanding the youth program, building more stalls for therapy horses, maybe even holding an annual rodeo in Storm's honor. The Carter Ranch was no longer just a patch of land in the Texas hills. It was a living testament to the power of unity, kindness, and never surrendering to bullies or despair. The lessons learned about courage, honor, and the bonds between people and animals would echo for generations. As the sun rose the next morning, Everett, Ryan, and Storm watched the first light spill across their land. For the first time in a long while, the future felt bright and boundless. The fight was over, but the story, Carter Ranch's real legacy, had only just begun.